Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today is a Russian infantryman from the Napoleonic period, and their uniforms are an interesting one because there was quite a bit of discussion about what constitutes the correct green. There are a few conflicting sources, and we'll talk a little bit about that as the show goes on, but this is actually fairly simple to do. As with most Napoleonic period uniforms, as long as you've got the white down, the rest will just look fine. So all of the paints for this one will be in the description. We'll keep it nice and simple. Let's get started. Now just before we get to the painting, I want to quickly point out that these miniatures from Lost Heresy, very easy to print. They are a little bit chunkier in proportion than you would find if you were to go via Warlord or Perry miniatures for your bulk infantry. But they scale very well with the North Star, the official Silver Bayonet miniatures, so it's kind of cool. I like how these guys look. There are one or two details that you're not going to see on most bulk infantry, like a wooden stake was not, it's not standard issue, but obviously you'll be able to spot what you do and don't include if you're painting regular infantry. Now, whatever the case, once he is assembled, first thing to do, of course, is to prime him. Now, I've used here White Scar from Citadel, but any light primer will do. Grab a white if you can, because it's going to make painting his trousers and his cross belts that much easier, but any light primer will do the job. So, Brain Matter Beige or Grey Sear, doesn't matter too much. Grab a white if you can, though. Now, continuing in my usual grand tradition of painting skin differently in every video, I'm going to start off here. This is Jasper skin from the Army Painter. Now, this is going to look quite dark when it first goes on, like especially surrounded by all of that white primer, but it's going to work just fine once we're finished with everything else. Now, I do need to add a little bit of water on that actually to make that flow a bit more easily. And try and be tidy when you reach areas like down on his hands, near his musket, because we're going to paint that with a speed paint or a contrast paint later. So you want to try and leave that white primer tidy. Now, ordinarily, I would suggest that you leave tidy up stages till last, because it's generally a little bit quicker. But instead, with this fella, what I'm going to do is any parts that I know I am going to go over with a contrast or a speed paint, I'm going to touch them up with a little bit of matte white before I get to that stage, because it's going to be easier to do it now than it will be to try and fuss with them all in one go. So up on its collar here where I've splurged a little, for example, this won't be constant. Like I said, just any bits that are going to be contrast, because a traditional acrylic will be able to paint over those mistakes anyway. Now, what I'm going to paint is his cuffs, his collar, and his turnbacks. What I've got here is Baal Red. This could just as easily be a traditional acrylic, like you might choose here, Dragon Red, or anything of the sort. I just like how this one goes on. Now, all of these that I'm painting, these would have been red, and his epaulets might also have been red, but they are colored according to, these bits up here, they're coloured according to the seniority of the regiment that he belongs to within the division. I will pop in the description one of the useful little guides I found which mentioned what each of those colours would be. Now you might be able to spot a couple of points already on his crossbelts where I did tidy up some of that white again because, my goodness, I made a mess. But I should have waited to have done this stage because we're going to paint in now the green of his jacket. Now I'm using Guardian Green, and the exact green of these jackets is always going to be a subject of some debate. There's a lot of different variations. People insist on like a bottle green, a dark olive green. There are schools of thought, let's say. If you wanted to stick to a contrast or a one-coat paint for this, I'd suggest maybe Absolution Green from the Army Painter. Or the Express range from VALLEJO has, what is it called? Monastic Green, which is quite close. Dark Angels Green from Citadel might be a little bit too dark, depending, but you can give it a shot. The important thing to bear in mind here is, a green will do. So, let's go ahead and carefully paint in the green jacket. Now, all the splattering on his crossbelt, yeah, I should definitely have saved that cleanup stage until after doing the jacket. But, oh well, important lesson to learn. What I'm going to turn to now is Garaghak's sewer, and we're going to paint in his musket. Now, most of the images I've seen of these, the wood is quite dark, but something like Gore Grunter fur, or what else is there? Snakebite leather will also work quite well for a wooden musket. I'm not too fussed. I want to go straight over the top of the metal stuff, but the white strap I'm going to try and avoid. Now we'll swing them around because we've got those stakes to paint in. I'm going to use here, this is Cork Brown from VALLEJO, but it's wood. You can paint it however you like. Now we can start painting in some of the black bits. Now for this, again, you could use an ordinary paint. I'm going to swap to Black Legion, mostly because I like the coverage. Now, straight over the gaiters and shoes here. Some of these gaiters would have been white, so you can pick whether to leave them or to paint them in. And then as well as his bayonet case and his sword sheath, you can use this to paint in his shako. Now, if you're careful, and I might swap to a slightly smaller brush for part of this, just avoid painting the white cord and you will be fine. You might have recalled me mentioning the epaulets being a different color. What I'm going to use here is demonic yellow to paint these in. It's really a case of just picking something that you think is going to look good and bob it on there quickly. I just remembered to paint in the center of the little pom-pom on his shako there with a green as well. It's the same green that I did his jacket. Grab yourself a medium silver, and I'm using here, this is plate mail metal. No great surprise what I'm going to paint in with this, all of the silver bits on his musket, and I'm also going to use this to paint in the Orthodox cross that he's wearing up here. Then for all of the brassy parts on his uniform and his musket, I've got here Retributor armor from Citadel. Now this is not quite as sort of rich and vibrant. It's not as warm as like Greedy Gold would be, which is why I think it's going to work better for a brassy base coat. So buttons, little brass plates on his shako and what have you. Away we go with this now. There are a surprising number of little gold bits on them, so take your time, cruise around and fill all of those in. What I am going to do now is do some of my tidy up, because there's bits on the green, on his epaulets and what have you that I do need to fix, and at last I can do that white. So, tidying up those bits now. And then of course, the last bit that I always forget is his hair. So I've got oak brown, and I'm going to use this to coat in his mustache and his hair. Obviously, anything you like the look of will work perfectly well here. Now, once you're satisfied with all of your tidy up, it's time to go ahead and shade the miniature. Now, I like doing this the old-fashioned way of just slapping a single shade over the top, and for this, what I've mixed up, this is half and half Army Painter's Strong Tone and their Speedpaint Medium. Now, if you've seen me painting Napoleonic miniatures before, you'll quite commonly see me use Marine Juice or Sonic Tonic. So the question would be, why am I doing it differently this time? Short answer is, so you can see a different way. If you have seen what Marine Juice does over white trousers and all that sort of thing, then a different approach is probably useful to show you. So once your shade is good and mixed up, go ahead, and not terribly difficult this part, blop it over everything. Now you're going to see straight away, it collects quite strongly in the recesses. But don't worry too much, because as it dries, it is going to become a little bit more subtle. It's going to tone down, and we're going to go over the entire miniature in this. So working relatively quickly, and any big clumps you get of it, just shift them around with your brush while that shade is still wet. Once you're done, we're going to give them about half an hour to dry. See what we have then. And once he has dried, you'll see how that shade, it does tone down quite a bit. It doesn't look as vibrant and dark as it does when it's going on. It gives us plenty of shading. I might have applied a little too much between his legs there, but for the most part, that's looking pretty spot on. What we'll do is just a couple of highlights. You can quite happily pop them on the table like this, of course, but why not go a little further? So I'm going to start first of all with Barbarian Flesh. And this, what I'm going to use it for, is to cover most of his skin. I want to leave just a little bit of the Jasper skin shaded in the recesses, so between his fingers, in the hollow of his nose and what have you. Leave that behind, but most of his skin will be Barbarian flesh. The part what I really like about these Lost Heresy miniatures is that the faces always have so much detail in them, and they're nice and deep, you can really enjoy painting them. What I'm going to turn to now, this is actually an older Army Painter paint. This is Kobold skin. Because I don't have the next color up in the, the rose skin tones, triad that they've got going at the moment from the Fanatic range, but I do have this, so I might as well use it. This I'm going to paint the backs of knuckles, and up on his face I will do the very tip of his nose, and the last bits of his cheekbones. And now where I used oak brown for his hair, I'm going to go up to leather brown here, and I'm going to paint in just a few little strips down his mustache to add a little bit of texture to that. And now the white that we were using earlier to tidy up with, we're now going to use as a highlight stage. So here I would recommend try not to go overboard with it, because you don't want to completely demolish all of the shading that we've applied. So for example, on the little knobbles here, you want to add a bit to give them a bit more shape. But on his cross belts and what have you, just a quick slash of that across the top. Same too with his trousers. Just make sure your paint's nice and thin. With just a few sketchy lines, you'll find you can add quite a bit of depth, and that white will look white again. Now when it comes to highlighting the green, I've moved up from Guardian Green to Greenskin, which is the next in the Army Painter triad. And all I'm going to do is a few little slashes of it here and there to accentuate some of the folds in the jacket. You don't want to add too much of this, because otherwise it's going to look like a much brighter, almost bottle green, and we don't really want that. Just a few little bits and pieces here and there to give him some shape. Now for the red, what I've got here, this is Legendary Red, which as well as being a really cool name, it's a very, very bright red, borderline orange really. It's quite close to Wild Rider Red, if you want to stick to Citadel stuff. There's epaulettes. Let's go ahead, and I have a little bit of space dust, which is really fun to say. Space dust. Then the last couple of highlights I'm going to apply, I have here, this is True Brass from the Army Painter. It's one of the new metallics, and it's quite similar to Liberated Gold, if you want to stick to that. But this is just a tiny touch more silver. It's got a slightly more aged kind of finish to it. It really does look like brass. And then for the silver, the last thing I've got here, this is actually steel from the VALLEJO Model Air range. And I like this one because it is a real bright, full-on, like ding. When you paint that on, you are going to know about it. So just a few little blips of this here and there. And once I'm done with this, what I'm going to do is take him outside, hit him with a varnish, and I will pop his base on him too. The recipe for that I will put in the description. So let's get a look at our chap here once he is all finished.
And so there at last, our Russian musketman is complete, and I had a lot of fun painting him, as I always do. I might in the future try a slightly darker green. That one has come out a little bit brighter than I thought it might do. I might even turn around and just apply a military shader or something over the top of that to dull it down. I quite like the finish personally, but I don't know. I hesitate to say how accurate it would be, because of course, since we're painting for Silver Bayonet, accuracy isn't 100% necessary, but I would like this to be something that I could also apply to a mass battle game. So maybe a little bit darker, maybe starting from something like Angel Green would have been better, but I still like this finish. So as always, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment.
as well as all of my wonderful patrons who keep me ticking in paints and glue, including my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you so much for your support, folks. Really mean it. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram, they're both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.